Today on The Future of Everything, the future of innovation. Innovation is not that easy to define, right? But it generally involves the creation of novel products, services, or processes that provide a competitive advantage for the person or the organization who is innovating. It's critical for modern businesses as there is a sense that innovation is key for growing, adapting, and maintaining a strong business. And we've all heard stories about large companies that seem to lose the ability to innovate, and they're ultimately surpassed and they become a footnote in business history because small companies that are more nimble, able to innovate quickly, outpace these larger companies. And I'm sure you can think of examples. This has happened enough that I think large companies worry about this. And they try to have programs and ways to stimulate innovation. Sometimes they even buy those innovative small companies, but the act of acquiring them sometimes can reduce their innovation. At the same time, new companies have a challenge of figuring out how their innovative ideas can penetrate existing landscape where there are entrenched players who have a lot of power and a lot of influence, and it's not easy for them either. So organizations big and small must figure out how to encourage innovation and risk-taking, meld it into their organization, compete at the same time with other organizations who are really trying to do the same thing. Professor Riitta Katila is a professor of management science and engineering at Stanford University and director of the Stanford Technology Ventures program. She studies technology strategy, organizational learning, as they apply to innovation, competition, and entrepreneurship. Riitta, you have worked recently on the idea of responsible and inclusive innovation. Can you explain what this is and why it's important?
Yeah, thank you first for inviting me to talk to you, Russ. This is a delight, so enjoying. You're absolutely right. Responsible, inclusive innovation is very important. Diversity is hugely important for creativity and innovation in general. So really, if you think about research on innovation, and I've done this for a long time, there really is not a more fundamental idea in innovation research than the idea that diversity in its many forms drives innovation, and responsible, inclusive innovation is part of diversity. So if you're an engineer,
has this always been accepted, or is it a new idea?
Oh, that's such a good question. So this has not always been mainstream, not even in research. So if you think about, watch movies about the ultimate creativity challenge, like take humans and space travel. You know, think about the Apollo 13 movie. You've probably seen it, right? It's a classic.
It's probably my favorite movie.
So when you watch the movie, though, you notice, you may remember, that the team that is providing the solution that to bring back the crew safely to Earth is very homogeneous.
Yes.
And quite frankly, you know, it took research and popular press and movies a long time to embrace diversity. So it was only a few years ago that Hidden Figures came out. So that's kind of a puzzle. Why is that? So why do we focus so much on these homogeneous teams when we talk about innovation?
Yes. So your program, is it to try to understand the value of diversity, or is that taken as a given and then you work to figure out how do we implement it?
So when we first started thinking about this, we figured there's actually one big problem. So getting more diverse sets of innovators involved in the first place, so including women in engineering, that is hugely difficult. So how do we do that? So about 10, 15 years ago, as a researcher, I realized that we also have responsibility here. As researchers of innovation, you know, we need to switch perspective as well. We need to take the less powerful party's side in research, and we need to understand what motivates creators from all walks of life to get involved in innovation. So that really has made us change the question. So you said in the beginning, you know, we need to worry about how big companies stay innovative. And yes, that's important. You know, what keeps big corporations from innovating. But as researchers, we had always taken the big corporations side and focused finding out, you know, how corporations could optimize their relationships with startups to get most out of innovation. And I felt we as researchers also had the responsibility to change the conversation. So we had kind of forgotten the low power actor side and entrepreneur in this case. So this was the actor with the innovation and with the new ideas and not the big corporation. So if we wanted more inclusive innovation, we really needed to put the spotlight on the entrepreneur.
So I'm going to guess, and I really don't know this, that it's more than just hiring. Like, so the first thing you think of is, okay, diversity, I got it. I want to increase diversity. I need to change my hiring practices. I need to hire people who don't look like me, who don't have the same background. Is it as simple as that, or is there more that has to happen in order to kind of stoke the fires of innovation on a team?
Very good. So yes and no. So if you are an engineer, for example, you're studying a medical device venture, of course, add more diversity to your team, simply add more MDs, add more medical doctors, because they know how to innovate medical devices. So that's adding educational diversity. Or if you're an engineer starting a software company, add somebody who knows how businesses work, add an MBA to the team. So, and it sounds simple, but you can gain up to 50% more innovation that way. So it is a powerful strategy. Now, as research in my team with my students, we've also looked at a lot, entrepreneur motivations. So really swapping the perspective. And what we found is that entrepreneurs often feel vulnerable in their relationships with big corporations. So they don't quite have the networks, and they, for example, don't quite know how to break into Silicon Valley. So
they're going to steal my idea. They're going to steal my idea or something like that.
There you go. Exactly. So they're the big sharks, and I'm trying to swim with the sharks. That's the metaphor. And I'm the Nemo and trying to do the good thing, right? And so what we found was that adding a third-party mentor, that what we provided in research is sort of providing social defenses, was hugely helpful for the low power actor. So it's kind of a third-party chaperone, kind of you're hanging on, grabbing the coattails of this third-party mentor. And so this really, if you think about it, the point is mentoring is important. It can help empower innovators that have perhaps traditionally not been able to reach innovation or have not even thought about innovating in the first place.
This is the future of everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Riitta Katila about innovators, and we were just talking about mentorship. Where do these mentors come from? Are these mentors from the big shark world, or are they neutral third parties? Because I'm sure an entrepreneur would love to have this relationship, but it sounds like it might be hard to establish.
Absolutely. The other way in which entrepreneurs could be thinking about either breaking into Silicon Valley, or we could think about how we could involve more diverse innovators, is to think about how you could teach people to innovate. It sounds very simple idea, but it turns out it's actually really powerful.
Right.
So that, just teaching people these step-by-step tools, how to innovate, how to be an entrepreneur, they do in fact work. So you give people a cookbook, kind of a recipe on how to innovate.
Yes. So that's important, because that means that innovation is not necessarily just born. It's not like some of us are born as innovators and others are not. It sounds like you guys have found that it is teachable. And that's a huge difference, because that means anybody who's motivated could kind of learn this process.
Exactly. So anybody can be innovative and creative. And if you think about it, that provides entry points to involve more diverse sets of people to get into entrepreneurship and innovation in the first place. So one of the big methods that many big firms and small firms, governments across the globe are using is lean startup. It's perhaps one of the lean startup.
And yeah, I've seen you write about that. Could you define that?
So this is a method for entrepreneurs and innovators. So you basically follow the scientific method. So you formulate hypotheses about your business idea or about your innovation, and then you leave the building and start talking to people, potential customers, and ask about the feasibility of your ideas. Sometimes you could push testable prototypes to your potential customers quickly. So very simple and straightforward. If you have science background, this is hypothesis testing.
What makes it lean?
It is lean because it's simple, and you have these prototypes that are pretty simple. So you iterate your ideas really quickly.
Okay.
And it sounds so simple, but turns out it works. So you give people this recipe how to innovate, or how to turn their ideas and technologies into commercializable products. But it does involve getting to know the sequential steps of the process. And the beauty of it is it gives you stepping stones.
Right.
So you can get more entrepreneurs from more diverse backgrounds involved.
So you've said a couple of things and I've looked at your papers. So I want to ask you, one of the phrases you just used a minute ago was social defenses for a startup. What is that? What's a social defense? I found that to be a very intriguing phrase.
It is a defense that you could use as entrepreneur or low power actor to use your social networks. So it's the idea that there are many types of defenses. So you could use timing. You could delay talking to somebody and perhaps, tame the shark that way. You could develop your idea more. You could use patents. You could use intellectual property protection, copyright, etc. This is a defense. This is kind of word of mouth. What is your reputation as an investor? What is your reputation as a corporate venture capitalist if you are trying to partner with entrepreneurs? And that's where the social defenses come in for the entrepreneur.
So all of that networking and going to parties, that's not just a waste of time. That's actually creating in some way mechanisms of defense so that you have people to call upon to help you and your reputation can grow as part of your kind of 360-degree strategy to grow the company and protect it.
Absolutely. And that's hugely important. People learn about your ideas, but at the same time, you also learn about your potential partners.
Gotcha.
Absolutely. I wish we could all go to parties.
Yes, especially these days, a party is an amazing idea. So another thing, and you said this earlier, you were talking about how an engineering team might want to bring in some doctors and that professional educational diversity. But I know you've written a paper about how sometimes too much, I don't know if you want to call it too much diversity, but I think in the example that you wrote about, too many doctors kind of spoiled the pot, to mix my metaphors. Tell me about this phenomenon that it's not like, is there too much diversity or is there too much bringing on of a new perspective that could be dangerous to an innovator?
That's a really interesting observation. So what we find is that doctors are really good at inventing, but they're really kind of not as good. They're kind of terrible at innovation. So what we particularly find is that you have to think about, when you increase diversity in your teams, you have to think about in what roles you add your skills or your diversity expertise in this case. So turns out that we really want doctors to innovate, but we want the ideas. They are great inventors, but they're terrible CEOs. Just the idea of selecting projects and ideas, in our research, we're showing they may not be the best ones there. Again, you need more. Maybe you need the business people there as well. So think about where you add, in what roles you add diversity. And if you want doctors, in this case, in medical device ventures, if you want them to innovate, you need to add them in innovation roles.
So you just said something very interesting, which is that an inventor is not necessarily an innovator. Can you expand on that? Because I think people might say, well, invention, innovation, it's about the same. It sounds like you're making a distinction between those two activities.
Yes. In engineering, we have lots of technological ideas. We have even patents, but they never reach the market. There is no customer. So invention, the technology, doesn't get to the form where somebody wants to buy it. So innovation, as I was using it, was that moment when somebody's willing to buy it, you have a market for it. It's commercialization.
So it has a business component to it in addition to the technical component.
Yes, you need to get out the lab. You need to leave the building and talk to real people, which I'm an engineer by training. So it doesn't come naturally to engineers to do that. And that's where diversity can help.
So tell me, how has industry embraced these ideas? So you've written very good papers about this. It sounds like you're trying to walk the walk in your own research group by, as you said earlier, the first place to test these ideas is the innovativeness of your own research effort. I'm sure that companies are watching and listening. How are they responding? Is this embraced or is there resistance?
So very interesting. So in the classroom, our students are passionate about diversity, responsibility, inclusive innovation. So our students are really wanting to make meaning. They want to find purpose. It's a core part of their drive. Students are really interested. Our courses are oversubscribed, split into many sections. Demand has doubled, tripled in the last couple of years. But on the business side, I think we all feel that, as executives and even as faculty, we're kind of, comfortable with status quo.
Yeah.
And we all say responsibility and diversity, it's good, but we kind of want somebody else to do it. So I think that's what makes both teaching students and working with students so inspiring, because they don't know inertia. They don't know any barriers. They're open to anything. They want to act right now.
And it sounds like they will be hired eventually by these companies and might start a ground up, I don't want to say demand, but expectation for these kinds of diversity initiatives.
Absolutely. We have a peak initiative at Stanford Technology Ventures program that is a student-initiated fellowship program about ethics and responsible innovation and entrepreneurship. And this was student initiated. So when these students graduate, they will challenge us to be more responsible. They will challenge Silicon Valley. And, there is much we need to do about Silicon Valley and some of the big issues in the society. So it's wonderful to see it's coming. So, if you're interested on the business side of this, run, do not walk, because the students are coming your way and they have the expectation that you will live up to their expectations.
This is The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. More with Professor Riitta Katila next on innovation, diversity, and how we can change how it all works in Silicon Valley and in industry at large. Next on SiriusXM. Welcome back to The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. I'm speaking with Professor Riitta Katila about innovation and the challenges to companies going forward, ensuring that they innovate. Well, during our last part of our conversation, you made a really interesting comment that some intervention had increased innovation by 50%. And that led me to wonder, how do we actually measure innovation? How do you look at a company and say that one has a lot of innovation and this one has much less? So can you just give me a sense for how you in your work would measure the innovation level of a company?
Very interesting question. So one way in which innovation researchers typically measure innovation is through patents. And patenting works as a measure in more industries than you actually think. So we've done work in chemicals, we've done work in pharmaceutical, biotech settings. I did my dissertation on industrial robots. We did work in software. So in all of those settings, measuring the patents and measuring the innovativeness of patents using various kinds of measures. You could pull up the technology classes, you could have diversity measures. So patents is a huge
I'm surprised that it worked in the software industry, because my understanding had been that they don't patent so much. It's more like copyright, but evidently even patents in the software industry can be indicative.
It has become more of a standard in, during the last 15 years or so, and less of a good measure just very recently. So you had to pick your time periods, right? Another measure is we've done a lot of work on collecting data on new product announcements. Again, if you think about industrial robots, you get not only the product announcements, which is a huge work to go to press releases, see what companies are introducing, but you could also look at how fast is the robot, how accurate it is, and you can build measures, quantitative measures of the innovativeness of the robot. Cool. So there are many, many measures.
And it sounds like some of them are industry specific, and then some of them are general purpose. But that's so that's great, because that means a company that's trying to increase its innovation has some benchmarks, so you can actually tell if it's working or not.
Absolutely, and that's where the creativity of the researcher comes in, knowing your setting.
Right. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, and I know you've written about, are these platforms, these powerful platforms, the social media and others, and their effect on the diversity and innovativeness of industry. And that's not necessarily a connection that people would see right away. So could you tell me why this got your attention and how you're thinking about it?
Yes, so there's definitely a sense, like you said, that we have responsibility as Silicon Valley to do something about powerful platforms, and we owe it to our students to do better. So what we've done research on what could be your favorite antitrust flashback, which is the Microsoft case in the early 2000s. Remember that?
Yes.
So the question we asked, and this is quantitative research, is did limiting the power of Microsoft at the time help increase diversity of innovation? So basically, if we weaken these big platforms, do we get more inclusive innovation? Because that's the intent of the regulators. Right. They always are saying, we need to get more innovation. That's the motivation for antitrust. Now, turns out the answer is, it depends. So for sure, as always, right? Right. So for sure, we find that innovation and diversity in particular suffers when there is a big platform. So you could say powerful platforms, it seems, can indeed kill innovation. But what is surprising to us as we look at the data is that these big platforms can also be a positive force. They can provide stabilizing order to their industries. So what I mean by that is they can minimize wasteful duplication. So when you let all flowers bloom, some efforts are going to be duplicates of others. Right. And so innovation doesn't become as efficient as it could be. So as a result, incentives to get more firms to enter an industry, for example, when you push down the power of the platform, are going to go lower. So what we find is kind of this double-edged sword, like this innovation performance trade-off. So powerful platforms are both good and bad.
So I find that intriguing, because I totally could see how how increasing the diversity and inclusiveness would lead to redundant ideas. People have the same idea, but doesn't that lead to then what you might call a very healthy competition to figure out which one is the absolute best? So it's funny, because you were talking about efficient innovation, and I don't associate innovation with efficiency, because the idea is that it's a very early thing. It's a very early activity that, if it's successful, will lead to kind of a hockey stick of improvement or growth or whatever. And therefore, a little bit of inefficiency in innovation doesn't seem to me to be a terrible thing. But it sounds like you saw that it was there was enough problems that it was worth highlighting as a challenge or a negative.
Absolutely. So what you just described is, from the society standpoint, this is wonderful. We get more ideas. There's more variety, more opportunity for consumers, all kinds of consumers, to get the product they want. Right. But, if you take 2 steps forward, or maybe 2 steps backward, think about the incentives for me as an innovator to enter that type of an industry, because there's a lot of competition now all of a sudden. So the incentives for me to enter then might change depending.
Right. So if you know that 4 other companies are trying to do exactly what you're trying to do, it would take a lot of confidence to make that investment and not just say, why don't we go somewhere else and do something else? And so that can actually paradoxically put a blanket on innovation or inhibit it when what you're trying to do is catalyze it.
Absolutely. And that's the tension, that's the trade-off. So both good and bad.
Okay, very good. So the final thing I wanted to ask you, as we have about 2 minutes left, is what's up next? What are the big research challenges in innovation and diversity and inclusion? Where are you placing your bets as the most important things to be looking at?
So this is a topic that is much in the minds of everybody right now. We had multiple successful virtual gatherings, both as researchers and on the teaching side throughout the pandemic. So this really shows that this is timely and urgent matter, even during a year of crisis.
Right.
So if you think about the good news is we are finding ways to engage students in the classroom to think about responsibility and ethics. So students are really interested. The bad and good news is that we have yet to find ways on the research side to understand what motivates firms to act in responsible ways. So linking responsible and inclusive innovation with the financial incentives and financial indicators of firm performance, that needs much more research, much more data and understanding than what we've currently done. So good in that, we can course correct, hopefully, with better data. We can learn what motivates firms. Bad because we're kind of behind.
Right. Do the firms welcome you? If a student contacts a firm and says, I'd love to do an internal study of your innovation processes, is the response good, or is it more complicated than that?
Please contact me if you are on the business side. We would love to hear from you. This is work in progress, and you are pointing out a really big hurdle.
So partners are wanted, and you are welcome. You're ready to work with them.
Absolutely. I'm coming running if companies want to collaborate.
Thank you for listening to The Future of Everything. I'm Russ Altman. If you missed any of this episode, listen anytime on demand with the SiriusXM app.